Hi and welcome to RC Modders, and this is the first video in a new series which I'm doing on the Bruder low loader trailer. With my Tamiya 14th scale truck stuff, I was particularly pleased with the way that I was able to get the trailers to be controlled by the trucks. And if you look at my earlier videos, there's the one where I had the extended Bruder low loader and used infrared to control the trailer through the kingpin to both raise and lower the rear ramps as well as automate the legs. With the Bruder series, I'm planning to go one better and actually have legs which go up and down rather than backwards and forwards, and separate the trailer into a separate model so that I can easily have more than one truck working with the trailer and avoid going to the expense and complexity of the full beer system, which is excellent but I don't think necessary for this. I haven't forgotten the other two current series which I've got going, so when some more motors come I'm going to be doing the detailed build of the truck, and once I've figured out the steering I'll be doing the Volvo A60H. So turning back to this project, let's get started. In terms of inspiration for this project, really it was the idea that I wanted telescopic legs operated electrically such that it would actually lift the front of the trailer high enough for the truck to be able to drive away, and then when the truck was reattaching not to have the problem of the truck pushing the trailer back when it was trying to locate onto the kingpin. So the very first job which I did was to actually file these little tabs down here a little bit so that the trailer could come on and off the fifth wheel without too much pushing or pulling. And the other thing which I did was I took the fifth wheel off, which is pretty easy to do, very slightly enlarged the holes using this body reamer, and then using double-sided foam sticky tape put a small piece of lead, and what that does is it means that the fifth wheel will always rock backwards, which is going to make it better for coupling and releasing. Okay, so turning to the trailer, the first thing that needs to happen is I need to get the existing legs off, which is pretty easy to do. That can go in the bits and pieces box, you never know when it's going to be needed. It actually took me a little while to figure out what I wanted to use for the telescopic arms, and having racked my brains for a bit, I came to the conclusion that possibly the best thing for me to use would be the handles from a medium-sized suitcase. So I took myself down to the local charity shop and I was able to buy a medium-sized case for about £2. Having taken it apart, you end up with two pieces of square section metal, and at the end of the larger one there is actually a plastic insert here which is a precise fit for this smaller one. At the other end, if I was to post it in, you can see how there's quite a bit of movement. On the smaller one you've actually got this piece of plastic here which actually prevents the smaller one moving all the way in, and this is what I intend to use for the feet. Having done some measuring and calculating, I worked out that actually the distance between this piece here on the trailer and the ground needs to be just under 5 centimeters in order to go with the height of the Bruder Mack truck which I converted. Now I have put springs in that which probably raises it about 5 millimeters or so. What that meant was that I actually wanted to have this piece here, when put inside, to actually be about 6 centimeters long, and that 6 centimeters includes this little plastic piece on the end. So I chopped that down and this is what I ended up with, and that will sit about there. What I then did was I chopped down this end piece here, and I think that in the original suitcase there was some kind of spring loaded mechanism within here in order to make the suitcase work, and so I actually chopped that down as well. The length of this shorter piece mustn't be longer than the outer piece, and so it slides up and down like that. What I did find that I needed to do was to actually file out inside the plastic here to make it completely loose. I'll just go ahead and make the second one the same as the first one. Right, those seem pretty identical. Then I'll just do the shorter one. Well, that end seems about the same. And then pushing a piece of old aerial which I've taken apart, which I'll come to the reasons for in a minute. I'll just saw that off and tidy it up. And then pushing the neck size down all the way through. And just quickly chop this off. This is only to temporarily hold it while I'm putting it into the electric saw. Those two seem pretty close in length, so that's good. Let's have a quick check to see how it all might look. So we would have one leg here, one here. I'll just hold it up with something, like so. And then the feet. There and there. Plenty of extension, so let's just check for the amount of travel that this will give us. We're certainly good for 5 centimeters. So at 5 centimeters you've actually got plenty of it still inside, so that's good. The next thing to do is to actually stick these in. I'm thinking that super glue is probably going to be strong enough, and I'm going to hold these in at the bottom with these wire holders from an RC lighting kit. Again, I'll come to the reason for that in a few minutes time. Pop this other leg in. Get them both in about the same position. Stick that down. So that's actually going to help with the glue setting, and later in the build these are going to become quite important. When you've got an important joint, it's always worth slightly ruffling things up to give the glue something to stick to. And just leave that for a few minutes. These are dry and they're moving nice and easily. I must admit I could have got them slightly straighter, but I think that that's going to be okay. Now, having got the Bruder cat excavator working really well in my opinion, I've decided actually that the linear servos which were on the Hobby King excavator can now be put to a different use. I didn't really like the way that the servos self-centered, and what I might do is replace the servo actuators with just straightforward actuators from Actuonix at a later stage. So I've now taken these off, and just for reference, I'll put this up the right way, and just for reference, these are the L12s 50-106R, which means that they have a 50mm stroke, 100 RPM, and I think that the 6 refers to the 6 volts that they run at, and the R refers to the fact that they link to radio control. My theory is that if I can put them inside here somehow, link them up with a rod, I should be able to push this up and down. I do know that if I leave it just like that, I'm probably going to be okay on the pushing down, but actually on the return stroke it's likely to give me problems. So the reason I put these little cable clips here is so that I can link an elastic band to pull it back in. At a later point, if this does work, I'll probably replace it with a spring if I can source one. This rod is simply a piece of 6mm aluminium, and if it does work on this side, what I'll do is I'll show you how I made this when I make the other one. I'm just going to put the thing together roughly and we can see if we think that this is going to work. Right, so I'm going to start by using one of the brackets which actually comes with the linear actuator and putting it onto this end here. 4mm bolt. That will go through there. If this does work, I'll either replace this with a lock nut or I'll use some Loctite. That's okay, it moves easily enough. And because of the dimensions, you don't need to pack it out. It actually rests quite nicely on this little black plastic shoulder here. So that should be okay. And on the other end, taking one of the legs, and this is the reason that I inserted the piece of chopped off aerial. It brings the diameter of this hole down slightly, much closer to the 4mm. Taking another one of those brackets and a 4mm bolt, I'll just pop that through there. Using some tube which I actually cut off from the inside of this bottle which I used in a previous build, I got a 2.5mm hole drilled right up in the top corner here, and the reason that I've done it fairly high is because when this is pushing along, I actually want this to be pushing against the top. I don't want any lateral strain at any time on the linear servo. So that's going to go about there. And this is right at the very back. A piece of 4mm copper tube which is going to go nicely through there. Pop these plastic tubes on just to keep it centered. So. It up, so that's moving nicely, and I actually cut a channel out here, and if this does work I'll be doing it on the other side and I'll be doing that on camera. That seems to sit nicely there. It can move about, but I don't think it's going to want to. And then taking this piece, slide it in. It does move nice and easily, so that's okay. Looks like it could do with some packing out. Obviously, if this is fine, I'll be trimming the bolt down. And then get an elastic band, a medium length one. So I'll pop that around there. And then around there as well. Let's just link it up and give it its first test. Right, we seem to be all set to go for the first test. I have just wired it up to some radar control which I had lying around. I don't think this is what I'm going to use, but it should be fine for the testing. So in the very up position, the leg seems to want to stay in the right place. And then let's move it to the down position. Right, and the amount of movement that we've got is showing at 49mm. In fact, it's showing at 50mm, 5 centimeters. So I think that that ought to be the perfect height. The real test is if it can actually lift the thing, and bear in mind there's no load on here, but then at the same time we've only got one side being lifted. Let's try that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some weight on the back just to keep it level. I think the drill should do. That's that. And it actually adds quite a bit of load to this as well. So let's try that. So lowering. That goes all the way up, and then raising. That seems to work nicely, and just checking the amount of height that we've gained. Yep, we've gained 5 centimeters, and I know that that is going to be well above wherever the truck might need it to be. Having done some testing, what I found is that the linear actuator needs to actually be off center in terms of where it is in this channel here and moved across slightly. So what I've done is I've cut a little bit more off the plastic here and just inserted a piece of plastic card to get it to move across, and then change the width of the little plastic pieces at the end. I'm going to do the one on this side now to show you exactly what I've done. So the first thing to do is to remove this whole area here, and probably the easiest way to start is with this saw. Followed by the trusty Dremel. And then I'm going to need to cut out an area here. However, I need to be careful to get it exactly the same size as the linear actuator, because it's going to help keep it in place. So starting on the far side over here, I need to cut roughly halfway across this circular moulding here. Let's see how that fits. That's okay. That's in about the right place to line up with the centre here. Then making a 2.5mm hole, and that hole is going to want to be up in this top corner, probably about there. When I'm wanting to place the hole accurately, I do prefer to make a quick pilot hole first. Then I'm going to want this to go over to the other side as level and as straight as possible. Because I've got the hole right at the top there, I'm going to make a little bit of space with the Dremel for the nut head when it goes in. And then it's simply a case of assembling this side in exactly the same way as I did the other side. Although I will be using some split washers to help lock the nuts in place. And I've already cut down the bolts so that they're not protruding at all. I actually ended up using a couple of them here in order for the elastic bands to have something to hook onto and not slide off easily. The first thing which I did was I made another one of these aluminium push rods. The width of the aluminium is about 6.2mm. I drilled a 4mm hole in the end very carefully using the pillar drill, and in the other end a 2.5mm hole tapped with an M3 thread. I did use the lathe and the pillar drill, however I don't think that that's necessary. This isn't a spinning component, so I think it could easily be done just using a normal drill and holding it in a vise. Taking the end bracket, putting a small M3 screw in there, do it up tight, and just try and make sure that the two holes are aligned with each other. If I find that this works loose, then I'll have to think about putting some thread lock on there, but I think that this probably ought to be okay. Right, a quick test. So we're within a millimetre, which I think is going to be close enough for the purposes of this. If I was really concerned, what I would do is I would just put the two actuators on separate channels and trim them slightly differently. So that certainly won't be a problem, and they go all the way up and down. However, before we go any further, there are a couple of things I would point out. First of all, when I first tested it, I couldn't get this to go up and down. It was binding in here, and there were two things which I think weren't right. First of all, I didn't have these two round the same way, and if you see, there are cutouts in the metal here where it mounts inside the outer sleeve of the leg, and when I first put this one on, I actually had them on the ends as opposed to the sides like this. I don't think that was helping because the small plastic piece was moving around. The other thing is I'd actually mounted this one here tilting ever so slightly in that direction, and when it was like that I could not get this to go up or down, it was just binding. So I've actually remounted it, and in terms of how it is, I'd say that it is almost perfectly parallel to this. The way I did have it mounted, it was maybe out that way by a millimetre or so, and that was enough to make it bind. You need to be very sure to get this absolutely parallel, and if it isn't when you've stuck it, unstick it and redo it, otherwise it will just bind. And you can actually test to see if it's going to work by holding it in place and mounting the actuator first. So I think that we've got something successful here. Now the other thing which I have found is that on this side, and it doesn't do it on that side, when the actuator is being used and you're coming back up again, it can actually cause this to drop out. And I'll just show you. So this, when it's the other way up, can actually go like that, and then you can fail to bring the thing up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this with something that comes with the actuator. The actuator actually comes with these very thin metal straps which are designed to go around the main body here, and I'm going to attach those to each side, and I think that the only reason this one doesn't move is because it's slightly stiffer. However, in time I could see that being a problem. So I'm going to put these on. So that's going to go round like that, somewhere towards the end. And then put a countersunk screw in from the other side. The reason that I'm using a countersunk one is because I'm going to want this area to remain completely flush. Okay, so having worked on it overnight a little bit and to tidy up the electrics, I've installed a battery that probably came out of one of the hobby engine models. This is just a cheap 7.2 volt 800 milliamp item, using another waterproof 1060 type speed controller, and I will include in the description a full list of the parts which I'm using. And for the radio control, I actually bought this very reasonably priced Turnigy i6S radio system. In the Black Friday sale, I think it was down to £22 for the transmitter with 2 receivers. I quite like it for this sort of model. I actually bought a mode 1 and I always use mode 2. The reason for that is because on the left hand side you've actually got a spring which will be good for the radio control vehicles, and for this in particular I actually didn't want a spring on the other side to be able to lift the legs up and down, so I'm very pleased with that. If you look here, I've actually installed this receiver and everything has been put in using cable ties, and I did spend a little bit of time arranging everything just to keep it neat and to stop anything dragging on the floor. The reason for this speed controller obviously isn't just to provide voltage drop to the receiver, but actually I'm going to be powering the ramps, and I'll be dealing with that in the next video. So just to show you how everything is working, and I'll just bring the transmitter into view. So that's at its very maximum height, which I think is around 5 centimeters from here to there. Everything is moving smoothly enough, and in terms of what it can lift, if I put my extremely heavy excavator, having modified it onto the model, it still has no trouble lifting it. Well, I think that that's about it for this part of the trailer build series. In the next part, I'm going to be installing the ramp lifting mechanism supplied by PiggyTailer on eBay, and I'll post a link here to one of his videos so that you can see what I'm going to be using. I can't easily think of an easier or more cost-effective way of doing this, I have fitted one of these before to my other Bruder low loader trailer many years ago. I'll just post you a link to that. And until the next time, keep those likes, subscribes and comments, particularly the comments, coming. And once again, thank you very much for watching.